I was a young girl in the Peace Corps. I was trained to talk about nutrition and health and community development. And I found my way into helping women who were going to give birth, because that's the way that they were able to say, well, my grandmother says don't eat eggs, but if you say my baby will be healthy, then maybe I could try something new. And so I began to get involved in the health. And one day I was in a village where I'd been many times, and I was holding a baby that I had seen before. She was about 9 months old, and her whole ear was full of a fungus. You couldn't see her ear, it was just a green fungus. And I was looking at her, and I was waiting for the doctor to see her. We were in a tiny village.
Where was this, by the way?
This was in El Salvador in Central America. And I was standing there looking down at her, and she looked up at me, and she looked right through my eyes, and her soul passed through my face, through my eyes, and she died in my arms. So I lost control, because no one ever told me what to do with death. Here in America, we put it in white sheets and send it to the hospital, you know. And I literally, practically threw the baby at the doctor and ran away, and I was hysterical. I was very young. It was the first death I had ever seen. And so what I felt was, what God is this that could allow an innocent baby, a baby that I had seen before, who was healthy one time, to die like that? I could not understand it spiritually, religiously. And so for 3 days, I stayed in my little hut, and I screamed and beat my breast and cried and did all of that.
At the time, were you religious?
Yes, at the time I was Catholic, a very devout Catholic in actuality. And because I love many things about the Catholic Church. I think it's the source of psychology, which was my field when I was young, and many other ways to forgive, to love Jesus' teachings, many things like that. And I learned a lot from these people in the village. On the third day, the spirit of that child presented itself to me. And she said something that shook my life. She said, "The choice of my death was mine, but the moment of my death was my gift to you." I couldn't push that out of my mind. I didn't invent that.
How was this presented to you?
Her spirit. It was a sense of her being in the room. It was a sense of her as a whole being. And I have since so often said to the world, don't think of your babies as babies. They're fully developed souls. A soul chooses its parents. It chooses to come into body for the evolution of its soul, which is the purpose of life. This is what I've learned. But so this baby said this to me, and I had to ask myself, what does that mean? What does it mean? And then I went to her funeral, and her mother grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me, really shook me hard, and kept yelling at me, "She is with God! She is with God!" No one there felt that it was a terrible tragedy. They all felt that she had been chosen by God. So suddenly I had to shift around. What does that mean? You mean consciousness goes beyond the death of the body? And I have had many, many experiences, because after that I was with many babies that died, many people who died. I watched their deaths, and I saw something that I had not seen before, which was the body dies slowly. First of all, it doesn't die in a second. The cells release their attachment to this consciousness that you have. And suddenly there is an opening, and there is a light. It's the light of the spirit. It's the light of the soul that goes into another dimension. You ask anyone in New Mexico, and they will tell you that they have felt the flicker of lights from somebody who has died, that they have felt the presence of someone they loved come to them after they've died.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you go from there? And one of the issues that story raises, and it's here in the book in many places, this question of reincarnation.
Yes.
How do you, what gives you faith? What makes you believe that reincarnation, these fully formed souls, a baby, and then when people die and come back, incarnate, what makes you think that happens?
Well, you know, first of all, reincarnation was something that was believed by all Catholics.
Not by the Catholic Church today.
Yes. No, not today. But they believed it for a very long period of time. And I would put forth that possibly the reason that they changed their ideas had nothing to do with spirituality, had to do with a different kind of practicality. But let me talk about reincarnation.
What do you mean by that, a different kind of practicality?
Well, it was a time when there were taxes, and those taxes were levied on the poor. And so what the poor people would say was, I'll pay it in my next life. I don't have it now, I'll pay it in my next life. And so there were many perspectives that were thrown out because they did not fit what was useful. That's not my perspective. Look in history, you will find it everywhere. But again, I wouldn't challenge that because that's not what's interesting. What's really interesting is, what does this mean? And it means something very important to me that I discovered through all these deaths, which is if scientifically you are half your mother's genes and half your father's genes, why would you only come once? Why would you be sent once to learn everything that you could learn about the third dimensional reality, about your body, and about heaven? So it makes more sense to me that you would come again and again to learn different themes that are about the evolution of your soul, that you would learn about God, that you would learn about your body, that you would learn about love, that you would learn about forgiveness, that you would learn about life and death through many incarnations of your soul. But I must tell you that people come to the Light Institute. I have heads of churches, I have many scientists who come there. Often they say, well, I don't believe in reincarnation. And I say, it's not necessary. Let's discover what your inner voice wants to tell you about your life. The reason I use the incarnation is that it's an expanded format for discovering yourself. So maybe you look at a life when you were a Roman soldier, and or perhaps someone who was burning people at the stake, and you see from that experience, because it's an experience, it's not an intellectual conversation. It comes to you through you. I don't say anything. But up come these stories. But what we learn from those stories is that we have evolved, that what was true 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and beyond isn't true in the same way. And so you learn about yourself. You learn that you've been the killer and the healer and the great spiritual being and the terrible, terrible victimizer, and that through it all, you have touched a chord of humanity that is changing. And it shows you why your life is the way it is today. The same people come in that are there today.
Maybe
it's fascinating.
From maybe the more ethereal to the very practical.
Yes.
Why did you start the Light Institute, found the Light Institute in Galisteo, New Mexico?
Well, I was pulled to Galisteo. I was pulled to New Mexico, partly because I wanted to keep the small village environment to raise all my children. By the way, I'm the mother of 6. I'm a very pragmatic person. If you can't do something with it, if it doesn't prove true to you, then I'm not interested in my intellectual mind. And so it was a great place to live. And it is literally a window to the sky. It's an opening that allows us to walk the arroyos and to feel the wind and to feel a connection so that life slows down and you have a point of centeredness, even if the next minute you're rushing to Santa Fe or for me, around the world in a very fast pace.
Galisteo, of course, has an ancient history.
That's right.
And you mentioned the Navajo
yes.
word from this College of Divinity.
Yes.
Are there any influences that you can point to, specific things from Native American spirituality here in New Mexico to your work?
Absolutely. Whether we're talking about the Pueblos or we're talking about the Apaches who came through Galisteo and destroyed the priest and destroyed the Spaniards 3 times until they brought blankets that had smallpox. And then those Tewa Indians from Galisteo moved to Santo Domingo to survive, those of them that survived. But the Native American approach, which I think is beautiful and that all of us need today, is that the wind is sacred and that all things are alive and that the Great Spirit, instead of punishing, embraces us. And so we can find peace and we can find a sense of, I feel the purpose of my life and I'm not afraid through those energies. And that's why I named the Divinity School and the school Nijoni, which means beauty way, everything in balance.